calls too, or receiving calls from others. But in particular, the way we used to do it back in the old days, believe it or not, was sort of top-down architecture and floor plan. We kind of a hierarchy of that. And what does this imply for how systems behave? Designers ought to be behaving more of the same, very differently. Forget about architecture, do architecture.
Well, so there's one really important thing that I didn't talk about because I don't want to keep everyone here all night long. But one of the really, so my talk that I was focused on today was really looking at topology. So who's connected to who, and what does that topology, what are the implications for a network? But there's another aspect which is equally fundamental, and that is actually the flow that's happening on a network. Right, so if you have a hub and no one ever wants to communicate with this hub, and the hub is gone, you wouldn't even notice. So, so there's a lot of additional, I guess the whole picture gets changed when we start thinking about who's actually using this network and how they're using it. So you probably deal with that a lot, thinking about architecting systems. So if you have one particular function that has to be called by everybody, maybe you need to make copies of it or cache it somewhere so that latency is reduced. So I think that when you're thinking about a real system, you're going to have to find the marriage between the flows and the topologies. And coming from physics, I've been thinking about the topologies. A lot of really beautiful work has happened in operations research where people try and match commodities and consumers of those commodities, and they try and come up with optimal network structures that allow these things to happen. Or transportation planning, so you have elaborate models of demand in transportation. So one of the main things in transportation engineering is a 4-step trip planning model, which is sort of like the cornerstone. So thinking about the flows is going to be equally important as thinking about the topology. But what my work is focused on is looking at topological aspects that can tell you about vulnerabilities in your system. But if you really want to deal with a real system, I think you'd need both.
Ken, what would you see as some of the most promising research areas in economics today?
Let me just make a preliminary answer because it has to do with some of the other questions. Namely that we deal with the economy, we deal with human systems, economy, polity, economy. We assume there's agency. People make choices. If you talk about designing a traffic network, you're going to assume you make some assumption about people choosing how to go. They try and find the shortest route or some simple assumption, and sometimes it can be quite complicated. So we're talking about designing, in economics, we're talking about the fact we assume people have agency and make choices, and as I say, they make choices. Now, the model has always been a kind of a rational choice. Now people are emphasizing, so one thing has been emphasized, maybe the choices are governed in ways different. People misunderstand probability. They don't even think in probabilistic terms. There are other concepts of the questions of how you deal with uncertainty. I don't want to start a long discussion here. But so one big aspect is the so-called behavioral economics. And then one version that people are trying to do is even to get is just like following psychologists, try to actually look at brain function and see if that tells you anything. I think my feeling is that's a little far off. I mean, there may be something there, but I don't think we're there yet. But I think what has been shown is that there are systematic errors compared to rational behavior. But I think a more important thing is the one that's really been emphasized here, and that's the networks. The fact is the idea of people coming to an impersonal market is a reflection of an important aspect of the world, but it's only part of it. And for example, even take something as simple as getting jobs. Maybe that's so simple. It turns out that more than half the jobs are gotten by private information. Somebody in the firm says there's a vacancy. The market would be things like answering advertising, just going to a business and saying, into the employment office and saying what jobs are available, that sort of thing. That does happen, certainly it's a major factor, but it is, to this day, less than half. It's usually, I know a guy who can fit this job. So that means that connections, who knows what? Who knows whom? I shouldn't say who knows. Well, who knows what and who knows who, both. So there's the information flowing over these things, and there's also what edges there are. And of course, you find there are, for example, ethnic consideration. Ethnic grouping plays a role. That's not the only thing. Lots of them. Going to the same university plays a role too, and so forth and so on. I mean, I think this has really very important, not only the labor market, that's one, but I think the credit markets also, who you give credit to, which may be as important. Because these things aren't impersonal. Yeah, sure, you go to tomatoes, you buy tomatoes, well, tomatoes are tomatoes, and so forth. Even then, even then you have favorite stores, and it's not even that's not so simple. But when it comes to things like credit, where I'm really depending on what I know about your honesty and about your willingness to pay in the future, your ability to pay in the future, some people know and some people don't know. It's what's, for example, conspicuously true is that some investors can get much higher rates of return than others. Why doesn't everybody go to the highest rate of return? I see Stanford University made 14% on its endowment. Of course, there's a little 20% down from the peak, you understand. But they made 14%. I can't make 14%. So in other words, it's not, the point is that somebody's telling them. Now, it's not only they tell them, so they go actively out to ask too. So networks, see, there's a question of how networks form. We've come back to the idea of agency. It is true that a lot of a network is a byproduct of something else, like family and ethnic grouping and neighborhoods. But all of it is, people do seek out other people. They want to come to study with a professor. They want to work for a firm because they know the firm develops people better than other people. So they form links. And there's a whole big rich literature, probably a little excessive, where the formation of the network is kind of a game. You join it because there are other people in it who can teach you something, or or a better source of information, or are more influential in decision making. That's why it gets to be pretty complex. So the network story, to say networks is already encompassing a great deal of quite different specific things.
Yeah, so I'm sort of curious about if you analyze stability of the results of these networks, or put it differently, you showed phase transitions, different kinds. Is there a more desirable phase transition they have than the other, and do you look at how to change the network so that you get maybe a more benign phase transition, one that's more manageable?
So I think that all of this, you need to have the context.
Okay.
So sometimes you want to have connectivity, sometimes you don't want to have connectivity. So whether you want to have things connected or not. One of the things that would be really great is to have phase transitions that have some warning signs about happening. So if you see it and you want it to be there, then you would accelerate your efforts in that manner. Or if you don't want to be it, you can hopefully mitigate it. So this is probably one of the huge challenges to us, is to be more able to predict warning signals in the real world.
Okay, one more question.
You mentioned interesting work in agency, and particularly when you look at the active formation of networks, and I'm thinking of, are there any thoughts that you have in the direction of asymmetric information feeding into the field of agency?
I'm sorry, just to catch the last part of it.
Asymmetric information as it relates to agency.
Oh, that's an essential part of the story. I mean, I think the biggest success of economics in the last 50 years has been the development of the idea of asymmetric information. The idea is that we're trying to engage in some contract, or there are a bunch of us trying to engage in a market or something. Some of us know things that other people don't know, and the ones who don't know it, let's say in a rational world, know that they don't know. So they don't. When these create incentives in that case, for example, you can't supervise a worker completely, so you try to create incentives for him to work. And there's lots and lots of examples of that kind. Relation between physicians and patients, relation between physicians, patients, and insurance, which is where we got it, or at least I got into that particular the point that I was interested in. So you have these phenomena. The insurance companies have known about this for a long time. it didn't penetrate in economics. They have these concepts of moral hazards, you know. If I insure your home, you need to be very careful about whether it burns down or not. I'm not saying you do it deliberately, but in fact, the curious thing, we think of insurance as kind of betting. You bet whether you, but you're not allowed to bet as much as you wish. You can only bet the amount of the house. Well, obviously, it's one obvious explanation. It's interesting that credit default swaps, which are a form of insurance, did not have that provision. You could buy a credit default swap on something you had no interest in. And it seems to me that if you just say credit default swaps are a form of insurance, and of course the other counterparties you have to have reserves, appropriate reserves, problem would be non-existent. And I still don't know. I don't know why it ever occurred, why you ever bailed out AIG. But I mean, a lot of the other bailouts I think were absolutely necessary, but the credit default swaps, I think they should have the counterparty should have taken. Okay, we dealt with a company that isn't able to meet its obligations. My problem, not the government's problem. I'm sorry, I got off my track here. And the other thing, of course, is so-called adverse selection. For example, you take people who buy annuities, they live about 3 to 4 years longer than people who buy ordinary insurance, payable on death. Well, what's the explanation? People have an idea that they're going to have an idea where they're going to live longer, a better idea than the company has. So if you think you're going to live longer, you buy annuities, which is a better. If you think you're going to die early, you buy life insurance. You think you're good. This has been known for 50 years. There's nothing new about this. The insurance companies have known this for, I don't know, a century probably. I know, I'm not joking. I must have heard it from an actuary 60 years ago, and it was not a brand new idea then. The problem of asymmetric earnings is one party has. On the other hand, getting the full implications of that. So that creates all sorts of inducements, all sorts of reasons to create non-market inducements of the kind different from what you expect on the market for behavior. But it also means that things are more complicated. That's why we have these problems with health insurance. But it's full of that sort of thing. Social Security, not quite so much. That's more like ordinary life. It still has its problems, but it's not quite as severe as the health. So I think there's been a big thing. But the management, and the full understanding of its implications, I think are still not fully understood because of the lack of understanding about networking.
Well, thank you again, our distinguished speakers and the wonderful panel and our wonderful audience. I really enjoy all the questions you're asking. But as you know, this evening we talk all the way about the network. So if I don't leave 20 minutes for your networking, you guys would blame me for the rest of the year. So now let's start the networking time. Okay, thank you.